This episode is part of a long series exploring how some evangelicals tied themselves to the Republican Party in the 1970s and 80s. This episode is going to refer to a lot of the stuff I've already covered. Recently, I talked about Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, Bill Bright. I'm going through a few of the influential people involved in this movement, though there are so many, I'll never cover them all. This is What Scared Tim LaHaye. The story we're going to talk about today happened, almost 20 years ago.
That's a long time, yeah.
Yeah. Nick and I were working on a Christian feature film directed and written by Rich Cristiano called Unidentified. There was this incident where the lighting crew wanted to park this truck out in the desert on sand. And we're talking a semi. And I went up there and told them, you shouldn't do that. This is sand. You're going to get stuck. And they're like, no, it'll be fine. The lighting crew needs to have the lights right next to set. We were shooting all night long. Sun comes up and all the lighting guys disappear. And of course, the truck gets stuck in the sand. They left me and this young guy who I am surprised was old enough to have a CDL to get it out. And so Nick and the camera crew
happily go home, had a nice dinner, got a good sleep. Chris, meanwhile,
stuck in the desert,
roasting as the heat starts gaining, throughout the day.
What did you think happened to me?
So I woke up and I saw that his bed sheets were perfectly tucked in, that everything looked like he had just vanished. And I didn't realize he just hadn't come home. But I wake up and I started panicking because I thought he'd been raptured. I thought he'd just been taken away and that God even neatly made his bed. And he was just poof, gone, clothes and all. And I was kind of terrified.
Yeah, it would be scary, but it's funny to me that your first thought was he was raptured, not, he's still stuck in the desert where I left him.
No, that'd be crazy. Why would anybody be stuck in the desert? Why would you do that? But it makes sense when we were raised on the Left Behind books to immediately jump to, you're just waiting for that moment for everybody's going to disappear and I'm going to be the one that's going to be left behind.
Right, when you saw movie depictions of this, it would be like a pile of clothes sitting in a chair, a bed neatly made, those kinds of things. There was detritus left behind, and that was the sign that somebody was left behind.
Yeah, so therefore, Chris must be gone. He wouldn't be stuck in the desert because he told those guys not to park there.
Right.
Self-righteously.
I was right.
He was right.
I was 100% right.
For some reason, people always want to park as close as they can to the thing they're doing, even though they have to move the vehicle 45 times.
Yep. My brother, who must have known that I'd been delayed in the desert the night before, thought I was raptured. That's how ingrained this idea was in us. That his first thought was that I had been taken to heaven, not that I was stuck somewhere babysitting a truck. One of the people responsible for my brother's reaction was Tim LaHaye, co-author of the mega-hit Left Behind book series. Those books scared a lot of people. In some cases, bringing people to a real faith in God. But LaHaye's legacy goes way beyond those books. While he clearly had a passion to bring people to Jesus, LaHaye was a man of many concerns, even paranoias. Today, we're going to examine some of those concerns to determine if they were legitimate or not, and see how, in many cases, he responded to them by becoming what he feared. You're listening to the show that uses journalistic tools to look inside the Christian church. We press pause on the culture wars in order to explore how we got here and how we can do better. I'm Chris Staron, and this is Truths. Okay, so the Institute for the Study of American Evangelicals at Wheaton College put out this bulletin in 2001, and it picked the most influential evangelical in the previous 25 years. So mid-1970s to 2000s. Who did they choose? Could be Jerry Falwell, right? Pat Robertson? Billy Graham? No. They selected Tim LaHaye. Tim LaHaye. That may seem crazy. Every documentary or podcast about Christianity in the 80s clings to Jerry Falwell. But they went for Tim LaHaye. Even Falwell did.
There are others who would, in certain ways, have been higher profile. But he has set the agenda for evangelicalism more than any other person.
We should get to know this guy. So this is the first of 3 episodes having to do with the LaHayes. In 2004, Rolling Stone magazine dropped an article called Reverend Doomsday. It contained this striking paragraph.
According to LaHaye, civilization is threatened by a worldwide conspiracy of secret societies and liberal groups intent on destroying every vestige of Christianity. Among the participants in this conspiracy are the Trilateral Commission, the Illuminati, the American Civil Liberties Union, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the National Organization for Women, Planned Parenthood, the major TV networks, high-profile newspapers and news magazines, the U.S. State Department, major foundations, Rockefeller, Carnegie, Ford, the United Nations, the left wing of the Democratic Party, Harvard, Yale, and 2,000 other colleges and universities. All of this is assembled to turn America into an amoral, humanist country, ripe for merger into a one-world socialist state.
Sit with that. This is the beloved author of Left Behind. He was convinced of a vast conspiracy to create a one-world government. Today, we're going to see how those fears guided his life. And if you're following the whole season, you'll see how a lot of it ties together in the lives of Tim and Beverly LaHaye. But first, a brief bio. Tim grew up in poverty near Dearborn, Michigan. His father died when he was young, and his mother put herself through Bible college. He sold magazines to make ends meet. Beverly also grew up poor. Her father died when she was 2, and her stepfather lost his job at the Ford plant. As she said, she grew up eating government cheese. An unlikely start for people who would back conservative economics that slashed programs to help the poor. He served in the Air Force in World War II, then went to Bob Jones University, which was then a segregated school. And that is our first
Season 6 tie-in.
Beverly and Tim first met at BJU, thanks to a seating assignment in the lunchroom. They married in 1947. He preached in South Carolina, Minneapolis, and then at Scott's Memorial Baptist Church in San Diego, which is located where? Southern California.
Oh yeah!
Come on, friends, we've been training for this a long time. This brings us to our first of Tim's fears.
The International Communist Conspiracy.
It is important where he lived. Remember, SoCal was a hotbed of conspiracy-driven conservatism in the mid-1900s. Tim embraced it, teaching and hosting meetings for the John Birch Society.
Season 6 tie-in.
The John Birch Society was and is a secretive group that sees everything they disagree with as a communist conspiracy, something that served as a template for Tim's later work, which led him to support Barry Goldwater.
Season 6 tie-in.
In 1964, the Republican nomination for president was neck and neck. Their choice came down to Nelson Rockefeller, the liberal Republican, or Barry Goldwater, the conservative who detractors believed could start a nuclear war. Rockefeller was divorced and remarried, and unlike today, in the early 1960s, that was a problem for conservatives. Before the state primary, LaHaye sent a letter to evangelical pastors across California, warning,
"A wife stealer who divorced his wife of 30 years, broke up another man's home, and took a mother from her 4 children stands a good chance to win the approval of Republican voters in California.
Skipping.
If he is elected, it will be the same as public approval of his wicked actions and help skyrocket our divorce rate."
He urged pastors to preach a sermon denouncing Nelson Rockefeller. As you'll remember, Barry Goldwater won the Republican nomination, the dream of Birchers everywhere.
I would remind you that extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice, that moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue.
But he lost the election by the greatest margin in American presidential history to that point. So, a big dud. But it showed the far right just how much they could do if they coordinated. That's fear number 1. Fear number 2.
We're talking about liberal courts.
Liberal courts.
Season 6 tie-in.
In the 1950s, conservatives were upset with Playboy magazine. there was a thing known as Comstock laws, federal laws that prohibited sending risque materials through the mail going back to the 1870s. In the 1950s, while Earl Warren was Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, those rules were relaxed. The Supreme Court was a favorite target for birchers. Due to this decision, porn and even gay porn proliferated. And where was the majority of pornography coming from? Southern California. LaHaye and other conservatives were not having it. Tim and a Republican state legislator joined forces to found the anti-pornography organization California League Enlisting Action Now, or CLEAN. They backed a measure that Newsweek magazine described as
supported by a California-style coalition of freelance zealots, kooks, and panaceists,
as well as respected members of the community. One, let's say, respected kook they cited was Ronald Reagan, who was, at the time, running for governor. He came out in favor of the measure, and then, no surprise, said he hadn't. Yes, he had. Reagan had a problem with the truth. We'll get there. The proposition would allow police officers and courts to confiscate naughty material. It didn't pass. But this particular dalliance into politics brought LaHaye into contact with wealthy conservative activists like Walter Knott, who, if you'll remember, founded Knott's Berry Farm, was a member of the John Birch Society, and funded both Goldwater and Reagan. Like Bill Bright, Tim LaHaye enjoyed the company of wealthy people, making this another
Season 6 tie-in.
Our next LaHaye fear is
Feminism and the National Organization for Women.
According to Tim, he was performing 2 to 3 marriages a weekend and doing couples counseling, which, after a while, he felt gave him some insight into couples. He published the unintentionally hilariously titled How to Be Happy Though Married in 1968, and the manuscript was spicy. Frank talk about the birds and the bees, something you wouldn't have expected from conservatives at the time. A later version I found included diagrams of human reproductive systems. Kind of a surprise considering evangelicals were known for fighting sex education in schools. But on the bookshelf? No problem. Starting in 1974, the LaHayes taught marriage seminars together through Bill Bright's family life programs, blossoming into a book they co-wrote called The Act of Marriage. This was the era of the Equal Rights Amendment.
Season 6 tie-in.
When conservatives, who liked the way things were, pushed back against second-wave feminism. Beverly saw the ERA as a way for feminists to promote lesbianism and abortion. And before you pass judgment, remember that factions of the women's movement did just that at the National Women's Conference of 1977. Beverly's book, The Spirit-Controlled Woman, advocated for traditional marriage roles the year before the conference, and it sold hundreds of thousands of copies. The two continued to write incredibly popular books. They toured the world giving lectures to missionaries in 46 different countries. And when they returned from their world tour, something big happened. I don't have a lot of details on this, but I want to imagine it's late. They're on their retro couch, she's got a blanket on her lap, he's in a onesie. Maybe there's popcorn involved. What we do know is that Betty Friedan came on television. Friedan, as you'll remember, was the author of the book The Feminine Mystique, that we covered in our Women's Roundtable episode.
Season 6 tie-in.
The Feminine Mystique is often credited with kicking off second-wave feminism. Beverly LaHaye was not a Friedan fan. She didn't think Friedan represented all women, especially not all homemakers. Remember, the Republican Party was the first to embrace the Equal Rights Amendment. But conservatives were not thrilled with this new strand of feminism, and would force the GOP to do a 180. So Beverly and 8 friends met. Actually, they met a lot. According to one account, 60 times. Their goal, to hold a local women's rally. But to book the venue, they needed a name. Any name. Beverly blurted out,
Concerned Women for America.
And they were off to the races, officially incorporating in 1979. One historian suggests that the CWA was a Protestant answer to Phyllis Schlafly's Eagle Forum. Her membership would soon more than double that of the Liberal National Organization for Women, or NOW. Though liberal women disputed CWA's numbers. Remember, for good reason, because the religious right had a bad habit of massaging the truth when it came to their constituency.
Season 6 tie-in.
Bringing us around to another of Tim LaHaye's fears.
The gay and lesbian movements.
Beverly was not the only conservative woman making the rounds, taking a stand for traditional values and stay-at-home moms, while rarely going home. In 1978, Anita Bryant,
Season 6 tie-in.
the actor/singer/activist famous for her orange juice commercials, was flying high. She helped to, temporarily, defeat a law in Dade County, Florida, that would have given gay people access to public accommodations. Now she was the face of a movement in California to prohibit gay and lesbian people from teaching in public schools. And it would have allowed school districts to terminate any employee caught in
advocating, imposing, encouraging, or promoting
homosexuality. This was the Briggs Initiative, or Proposition 6. Protesters carried signs with her likeness next to that of Stalin and Hitler, and sold dartboards with her face as the target. Tim LaHaye was part of that conservative voice there, propping up Prop 6. The fight dovetailed nicely with his new book, The Unhappy Gays, published in 1978. What is his core complaint? I'll give you a hint. I've spent a lot of time talking about it in the last year and a half. It's education.
Season 6 tie-in.
There's a reason so much of the season has been about education, because it's a big deal. Who gets to decide who teaches what to kids? You might want to shrug this off, but it's central to understanding why some evangelicals tied themselves to the GOP in the 1980s. Because there were movements taking prayer and Bible reading out of schools and adding in violent, secular, and sexual content. They sometimes did encourage gay and lesbian lifestyles. Not everyone was okay with that. Fight the temptation to see a secular, sex-positive society as a neutral option, because it's not. This ties into another of Tim's fears.
The NAACP.
For those of you who want to cheer on Tim LaHaye's ideas about schools, you might want to hold your horses. Almost a decade earlier, Tim formed the San Diego Unified School System, as well as San Diego Christian College, where they were segregated until 1977, when a court order ordered them to integrate.
Season 6 tie-in.
And some journalists argue they're still segregated. Do you see how this whole season comes together on the LaHayes? Like Oral Roberts, Pat Robertson, Jerry Falwell, and so many others, they started schools because so much of this is about education. But also, remember my episode about the death penalty? According to Falwell's book, Listen, America! LaHaye wrote a list from moral majority members to ask candidates when they campaigned for office. Among some of the ones you might expect,
do you favor sex education, contraceptives, or abortions for minors without parental consent?
You had?
Do you favor capital punishment for capital offenses?
Who was fighting capital punishment in the 1970s? The NAACP's Legal Defense Fund. Because the people being put to death by the government were disproportionately black. LaHaye saw the NAACP as part of a grand scheme to create a one-world government that would someday put an end to the death penalty, which he saw as crucial to a Christian society.
Season 6 tie-in.
Proposition 6 also failed, but it didn't really need to pass. Because movements like this one demonstrated to conservative evangelicals of that era that they could get involved. We've spent about half the show talking about some of the smaller battles fought by Beverly and Tim LaHaye. When we return, I'll show you why Jerry Falwell and others saw the LaHayes as the big dogs of their movement. While you listen to the ads, why not take a moment to leave a 5-star review on your podcasting app, and maybe type in a few comments. It helps people find the show. Okay, here come the ads. Welcome back. The 1980s were a busy time for the LaHayes. Beverly released 8 books, including What Lovemaking Means to a Man. Tim wrote at least 2 more. But their biggest contributions to the decade weren't on the page. They were political. Our next LaHaye fear is
liberal ideas about families.
In 1980, the Carter administration sponsored the White House Conference on the Family. This was a pretty smart move because conservatives were using the term family to describe their agenda. Carter needed wide appeal to defeat Reagan. His administration acknowledged that families were being
pounded by successive waves of deep and often unpredictable change.
But people like to be upset. So when the conference was renamed from Conference on the Family to Conference on Families, conservatives were not happy. Families, in their minds, implied changing views on marriage, single moms, gay and lesbian parents, and the Carter administration didn't appear to have learned much from the National Women's Conference 3 years earlier.
Season 6 tie-in.
It was similarly structured, with local meetings nominating representatives who would then attend 3 regional conferences. Once again, conservatives flooded the meetings, and once again, there were counter-rallies. And who spoke at them? Tim and Beverly LaHaye. Actually, Beverly organized the Los Angeles rally, where more than 7,000 people showed up. The White House Conference on Families was a flop for the Carter administration. But the president tried again, addressing the conservative National Religious Broadcasters Convention in January of 1980. The following day, he invited a small group of the religious right to a breakfast. It was held in the White House, a Southern meal of eggs and grits. The guests included Falwell, Tim LaHaye, Jim Baker, and D. James Kennedy. Carter tried to play the middle, but these guys were radicalized. They wanted to hear nothing but express agreement with their worldview. They were concerned about
Planned Parenthood and abortion.
Someone in the group of pastors pointed out the thousands of people demonstrating in the March for Life just outside. Carter's response was vague. Another person asked about the lack of evangelicals in his administration, and Carter hedged. To have Tim LaHaye tell it, and this is an actor reading the lines, he asked the president
why he, as a Christian and pro-family man, as he protested to be, was in favor of the Equal Rights Amendment in view of the fact that it would be so harmful to the family, and he gave some off-the-wall answer that the Equal Rights Amendment was good for the family. Well, I knew when he said that he was out to lunch. We had a man in the White House who professed to be a Christian, but didn't understand how unchristian his administration was.
He continued later while waiting outside for his limo.
I stood there and I prayed this prayer. God, we have got to get this man out of the White House and get someone in here who will be aggressive about bringing back traditional moral values. We got into this limousine, and here were some of the leading ministers of America, and they were stone silent. It was like a depression had settled on all of us. We all had made a commitment to God that day that, for the first time in our lives, we were going to get involved in the political process.
I'm going to interrupt there for just a second. Tim had been involved since at least 1964, when he sent a letter backing Barry Goldwater to California ministers. That just isn't accurate. Back to Tim.
We were going to get involved in the political process and do everything we could to wake up the Christians to be participating citizens instead of sitting back and letting other people decide who will be our governing leaders.
It would be inaccurate to say that the result was the moral majority.
Season 6 tie-in.
Really, it was a grab bag of organizations, each of them run by different players, following the style of Paul Weyrich and Phyllis Schlafly. Instead of starting one organization that addresses lots of issues, create a lot of organizations that each touch on just a few. That makes it easier to build a coalition.
Season 6 tie-in.
But yes, the moral majority was one of them, and Tim LaHaye was one of the founders. Oh, and the moral majority was established the year before the breakfast with Carter. So the tiny narrative that the president tipped the scale to make them politically active isn't accurate either. Bill Bright's publishing house,
Season 6 tie-in,
had been training people to run elections since at least 1976, and their distaste for Carter was solidified. We'll get into why in a future episode. In 1980, a month before the election, the Reagan campaign learned from Carter. They established a family policy advisory board, including many anti-ERA women like Beverly LaHaye. Phyllis Schlafly was not appointed, considered too risky.
Season 6 tie-in.
Suffice it to say, a lot was going on. Tim LaHaye made waves in 1981 with the Moral Majority, protesting lewd content on television. Programs like Dallas, Soap, Charlie's Angels, and MASH. And the protests didn't work. MASH was one of the most successful TV programs in American history. The LA Times interviewed Tim as he waited for an airplane, flipping through Parade magazine. He had an anger problem and was described later in life as being a grump. He didn't mind taking a shot at his peers who didn't get involved in politics, like Billy Graham. To quote the LA Times,
"The issue is clear," LaHaye declared, cutting the conversation short with what he seemed to consider the ultimate blast. Billy Graham has become a moderate.
Graham had been burned by tying himself to Nixon, so he stayed in the background. The other guys decided not to learn from his mistakes.
Season 6 tie-in.
There are two really key things going on here. One is the obvious slam against moderates. Earlier this season, I covered the relative diversity in the GOP in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s.
Season 6 tie-in.
Where there were moderates and even liberals in the Republican Party. That was becoming increasingly rare in the 1980s, thanks to the far right, though it would still be a few more decades before the party became almost homogenous. The second observation is that the same was true for evangelicals. The National Association of Evangelicals was founded in part to bring together evangelicals of different backgrounds. The ecumenical movement of the mid-20th century bonded Christians together to organize for missions, radio time, equal access to public accommodation, and evangelism, especially around the person of Billy Graham. In the 1980s, they began their slow drift away from ecumenicalism as organizations like the Southern Baptist Convention and the Moral Majority radicalized, and a slew of new organizations emerged. How tied into politics did they get? Beverly's women's group, Concerned Women for America, booked Ronald Reagan, the sitting president of the United States, to speak at one of their events. And CWA overlapped with other Christian organizations, like Pat Robertson's American Center for Law and Justice.
Season 6 tie-in.
The CWA employed lawyers to protect their conservative ideas. Their most public case was likely Mozert v. Hawkins County Public School in 1986. Members of the media dubbed it Scopes 2, after the famous Tennessee court case where William Jennings Bryan advocated to keep evolution out of public schools.
Season 5 tie-in.
I covered the Scopes trial in depth last season. Mozert and Scopes were really not similar. CWA lost the case because the material they found objectionable did not concern religion. What did they reject as godless? The Wizard of Oz, Cinderella, and the Diary of Anne Frank. Beverly and Tim were so influential that they were invited to co-chair Jack Kemp's 1988 run for president. At the time, Tim was president of yet another organization, the American Coalition for Traditional Values. This election was a sticky situation, because their friend and fellow evangelical speaker, Pat Robertson, was also running for president.
Season 6 tie-in.
Which is where we see another fear of Tim LaHaye: Catholicism. Tim's time on the Kemp campaign was short-lived. The Baltimore Sun read through his books to uncover some controversial material, referring to Catholicism as a, quote, false religion, end quote, and writing that Jews
have often yielded to a secularistic, even atheistic spirit.
These words would have been fashionable a few decades earlier, but not in the coalition days of the 1980s. Critics also rankled at Beverly's insistence in USA Today that
politicians who do not use the Bible to guide their public and private lives do not belong in office.
A thought that may as well have come from the mouth of Francis Schaeffer.
Season 6 tie-in.
Tim left the position 1 week after he started. Beverly was determined to stay on. Until she wasn't. As Super Tuesday approached, she withdrew her support from Kemp, with her aides saying that the campaign had sold out to moderate ideas. But they publicly strayed from their idealism. LaHaye could trash talk about Jews and Catholics, but he was found to be uncharacteristically tolerant of the cult of Sun Myung Moon's Unification Church, which believed its leader was the Messiah. In 1986, an article from Mother Jones revealed that one of the largest financial supporters of his American Coalition for Traditional Values was the Moonies. The scandal, plus a general decrease in interest in far-right causes after Reagan's re-election, signaled the end of the ACTV, and it was shut down. Why would LaHaye be so outspoken about one religion and not another? Again, a lot of this has to do with money. Enemies are harder to keep when they're offering you cash.
Season 6 tie-in.
Tim and Beverly LaHaye were complicated people, and it's hard to quantify their influence, but chances are, whatever you believe, your life has been touched by these two people. If you've ever read A Christian Guide to Marriage or Sex, you have these two to thank. And by the way, some of the stuff they wrote was so intense, I couldn't put it in the podcast. They were at a bunch of Christian events that tied the religious right to the GOP, like the Religious Roundtable, where Reagan delivered his now famous "You can't endorse me, but I endorse you" speech. They were at the founding of the Moral Majority and founded a slew of their own organizations. Tim's schools were, and maybe are, a part of the Segregation Academy fight. They were a part of the boycott spirit of the 80s and 90s. They supported Ronald Reagan. Like many of their cohorts, they founded schools, published books, spoke at events, and stayed in the media. The model established for them 100 years earlier by D.L. Moody. Tim did this in part by writing about
the end times.
Tim positioned himself as a sort of expert on premillennial dispensationalism, the idea that the world and the church were going to get worse and worse until Jesus' return. A number of his nonfiction books detailed his ideas about this, from Charting the End Times to Revelation Revealed. Starting in 1995, his name appeared with that of Jerry Jenkins on the unbelievably popular Left Behind book series, which have sold north of 65 million copies worldwide. As I said at the top of the show, these books had real impact, encouraging people to take their faith seriously, while also igniting a fresh wave of end times mania.
Season 6 tie-in.
Finally, we should talk about one more of Tim LaHaye's fears.
The Illuminati.
This one goes back to at least the 17 and 1800s. A purported network of well-connected, wealthy people determined to control the world. A big bad organization you can blame for everything you disagree with. The thing I can't shake in reporting about guys like LaHaye, Falwell, Robertson, Robeson, and Paul Weyrich is that they essentially created what they were afraid of. A close-knit, secretive web of organizations that want to determine the course of world events. As we'll see soon, LaHaye was instrumental in creating the Council for National Policy, a dark money group that, according to Jerry Falwell, has channeled hundreds of millions of dollars to extreme conservative causes, including, reluctantly at first, Donald Trump's campaign for the presidency. LaHaye was afraid of the Illuminati and essentially created one of his own. For those of us who grew up in the evangelical culture, guys like LaHaye did some real good. They pushed us to own our faith, to take the Bible seriously. But they also nudged our people into extreme territory. They made us afraid of our friends and neighbors. They encouraged our fascination with money, leadership, and politics, and gave us a series of political messiahs from Barry Goldwater to George W. Bush. They turned our loved ones into automatons who go on and on about those people and their international conspiracy, hoping that we wouldn't notice that they were playing the same game as their dreaded Illuminati. For that reason, the memory of who Tim and Beverly LaHaye really were and what they really did can never be left behind. I used a ton of resources for this episode. As I finished typing this, I counted 12 books on my desk. I also accessed a lot of newspaper articles. Too many to list here, but I'll name all my sources in my show notes and on the website at trucepodcast.com. Special thanks to the Teton County Library for granting me and everyone with a library card access to newspapers and journal articles. I think it's good to remember that libraries are an incomparable public resource, and we should support them. Special thanks to my friends who loaned me their voices for this episode, including Kenneth Forte and Chris Sloan. I'm grateful for my brother and friends who let me walk them through all of this, sometimes cornering them in polite gatherings to try and put this together in my brain. If you'd like to be a part of making this show happen, please do. I'm doing this show full-time, which means better episodes for you and a more manageable work-life balance for me. But I'd still love to expand and bring in some other voices, maybe add a producer someday. In the meantime, I gotta keep the lights on. Visit trucepodcast.com/donate to learn how to help. It can be as simple as finding me on Venmo at @trucepodcast. Truce is a production of Truce Media, LLC. God willing, we'll talk again soon. I'm Chris Starin, and this is Truce.